A long time ago, well, 1977, a movie was released in cinemas that changed cinema forever. That movie was Star Wars. Later titled Episode 4 A New Hope, the iconic movie sees Luke Skywalker joining forces with a Jedi Knight, a cocky pilot, a Wookie, 2 droids, in an attempt to save the galaxy from the Empire's world-destroying battle station, and also attempting to rescue Princess Leia from the mysterious Darth Vader. Written and directed by George Lucas, the movie stars Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, James Earl Jones, David Prowse, Alec Guinness, Peter Cushing, Kenny Baker, Anthony Daniels and Peter Mayhew. I've got to be honest, I was looking forward to doing this one. Yeah, as you probably guessed, I'm actually quite a big Star Wars fan, just ignore the posters. Honestly, this is a franchise that obviously I've been watching since I was a little kid. I can't even remember the first time I watched it. It was that long ago, and honestly it's kind of scary actually doing a review for this one because it's such a well-beloved movie for not only myself but so many fans across the world. I don't know if I'd say this is the first sci-fi film franchise that I'd ever seen, but I think this is definitely the first one that really sort of left any sort of proper impact on me. I was a 90s kid, so I never got to see the original movies when they first came out. I didn't see Phantom Menace when that was in cinemas, but that was around about the time that I started actually watching these movies, and for me it's always been those first 4 movies, and then from that point on I was sort of growing up alongside with it, so I was getting like the toys, the lightsabers, the games and all sorts. It's pretty safe to say that this is one of my favourite film franchises and TV as well. It's up there with things like Marvel for me. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reviewing the entire original trilogy, and today the first one that we're going to be doing is the original, the one that started it all, 1977, Star Wars. So the first thing that I've got to start off with obviously is the casting for this movie. Most of the cast in this film were pretty much unknown actors at this point in time. I mean, you'd never know that today, but back when they were cast, they were nothing basically. You know, obviously we had the veterans like Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing, who were instantly iconic actors who've been performing in like the Hammer horror movies and the Lady Killers and stuff like that, and especially for us in the UK's Dave Prowse, I think it's the Green Cross Code Man. It's a little bit before my time, but my parents actually have met him in the past, and they always said he was a really nice guy. But in terms of the main core cast, these actors basically haven't really done anything prior to this movie other than Harrison Ford, and honestly every single person does do a genuinely great job with their roles. Obviously Mark Hamill leads everything as Luke Skywalker, and you know, there are people who say that he's a little bit whiny and all sorts in the first one, but that's kind of the idea. He is supposed to be just a kid at the end of the day. I'm not quite sure how old he's supposed to be in this movie. 19 actually. There's me Star Wars trivia kicking in for you there. And it's only really towards the beginning that he's that sort of kid character. As the movie goes on and progresses, he does start evolving, he does start maturing and getting a lot more experienced as well. And a similar thing can be said for Harrison Ford in this as well, because his character sort of starts off like this cocky smuggler who eventually starts evolving into a bit more of a heroic character. And I think that the way that the character arcs are handled for not only those two but a lot of the other characters as well, it is done really well. We're also introduced to Carrie Fisher playing Princess Leia in this movie. Again, she is really good. I think that she definitely does hold her own against a lot of the others, and I do think that they all do have a really good connection and chemistry between them. She really does stand out. She is a genuinely great performer in this, and I think that what they do with her character, with the way that she sort of starts off as like the damsel in distress sort of princess, and then the way that you start seeing that no, she actually can't handle herself, and to the point where you start seeing her like leading the rebellion and all sorts. It is really great how it's done, and Carrie is genuinely really good in this role. I do think that the accent's a little bit questionable at times, because she seems to have like a really strong sort of British accent, and then it sort of goes American, but that's just me being really nitpicky. I don't know if it's meant to be deliberate. Maybe it's meant to be like whenever she's addressing somebody from the Empire, when she's being professional, she goes into more of a British accent, but when she's, you know, with all the others, she starts going a bit more American. Honestly, that doesn't really bother me. One thing that kind of surprised me with this movie, like rewatching it and thinking about how a lot of movies are done, not only then but today as well, this movie wasn't really afraid to sort of start off with humanless characters. Like, they start off with the droids C-3PO and R2-D2. They kind of drive the story forwards with the first act, because they're the characters that you're introduced to early on, and it's through them that we meet Leia, the Stormtroopers, the Rebels, Darth Vader, And it's just a really great and interesting way for not only the movie to start, but the whole franchise as well, because it is very different. But we also, if you are aware, if you're not aware of this actually, originally what was going to happen was the droids were meant to be like the ones telling the story, and they were going to be like the narrators in a way, so that's why it starts off with them. I know that Anthony Daniels and Kenny Baker didn't exactly have the best of times while they were making these movies, because there's no way that you'd enjoy like being strapped into that costume in the middle of a desert. But they are both really good in the role. I do like how Anthony Daniels does hold himself when he's C-3PO. I mean, it's not really something that you can avoid, because he is quite stilted and he can't really sort of move too much, but that does kind of work quite well for the character. And then when it comes to Kenny Baker, I think how he operates R2-D2, he does bring a lot of personality to that character, and it's definitely enhanced from the sound effects as well. I'm just going to come out and say R2 is definitely my favourite droid. And speaking of uncomfortable costumes, we've also got Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca, the Wookie. He is just a big, huge teddy bear. There's definitely a lot of personality that Peter does bring to the role, and I do think that, especially with his height and everything, it really does make him seem quite alien. He is genuinely a great addition to this movie, and again, he is instantly iconic. You recognise that character immediately, and it really is a testament to just how good some of the costumes and the performances actually are in this, especially when you have like three characters you can't really see the faces of. They aren't out of place, and they do fit really well into this universe. But we can't have just unknowns in this movie, so of course there needs a bit of star power in a way to sort of make this movie a bit more credible when it was originally being made, and the actor that they got to do this was Alec Guinness. Alec Guinness plays Ben Kenobi in this, and he's basically just like the old wise mentor who has this connection to this mystical entity called the Force, which is like this energy that surrounds and binds everything together. Oh, so hard not to quote everything. He is genuinely really good in this movie. I don't believe that he has a lot of faith in everything that was happening in the movie, but the performance that he does give, it is genuine, it is believable, and I really do like his addition in this movie. But we can't have a movie about good versus evil without some bad guys. This movie, I'm going to start off with one of the minor villains before going on to the big guy. So the first one I'm going to talk a little bit about is Peter Cushing as Tarkin. I'll be honest, I've always kind of thought Tarkin was like the main villain of this movie. He's the one who's kind of pulling the strings, he's the one who's kind of behind everything, basically like the face of the Empire in a way. And I really love how Peter Cushing does perform this role, because he does have this calmness to him, but like whenever he gets angry, he's just sort of, he is intimidating, he's more intimidating than you'd think. It's just the way that he never sort of shouts, he never gets angry, it's just the way that he's sort of like, especially when he's trying to get information from Princess Leia, he never screams or shouts or is like, I'm going to do it, or anything like that. It's just him sort of getting in her personal space, and the way that he's just taller as well, it does give you a really good intimidating vibe from him. But he's not the villain that everyone remembers. This movie introduces us to one of the most iconic movie villains of all time, Darth Vader. Physically, Darth Vader is played by Dave Prowse, and he is huge, and he really does have this great presence about him whenever he's on screen. Like the first shot of him, as soon as he enters, instantly iconic. But even I'll admit, Dave Prowse doesn't quite have the voice for this kind of character, so they brought on James Earl Jones to voice his character, and honestly, the combination of those two actors, this is one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. But in terms of his characterisation in this movie, I think that he doesn't really have too much of any sort of backstory or anything like that. I mean, in this movie, you don't know anything about him. He's just like this really mysterious, cloaked figure that shows up and everyone's terrified of. As you go through the movie, you start seeing like just how intimidating he actually can be, because you see how ruthless he can be, how good he is with lightsabers. You also see like he has these abilities where he can like choke you without even touching you, and it really does add up to building up who this character is. But we don't find out an awful lot about him. But he definitely serves his purpose in this movie, and it's more focused on the heroes than anything else, so it's not a bad thing at all. And obviously they do start building on that towards more future episodes. And in all honesty, he is just cool. When it comes to the plot of this movie, it is very straightforward. It is basically the hero's journey. It's one of the few times that I've seen it done genuinely really well. Now, if you are familiar with the hero's journey, then obviously you are going to recognise little plot beats here and there, but the trick to it is making it seem natural, making it seem like this is really happening, this is unfolding as it should do. But this one also combines a lot of elements of things like mythology and religion and stuff like that, and it's done in a way that every person of every age group can get into and understand, even though there are definitely elements that I think older people are definitely more likely to understand. Like there are little bits of like the trade negotiations and stuff like that. They kind of bring it up a little bit in this one, so it's not completely devoid of them as everyone seems to think they are. It's easy enough to follow when you are young because you don't really focus on stuff like that, but majority of the movie kind of focuses more on the story that's being told rather than the political stuff. This is intended to be a movie made more oriented towards kids, but there's enough in here that adults can definitely enjoy and get on board with, and this is definitely a family movie. I'm going to talk a little bit about the merchandise in the future, but I'm just going to leave that more for one of the future episodes. I think one of the reasons why this movie is so engaging is through the world building. This feels like an already established universe that this story just happens to be taking part in. That's kind of where like the political side of things sort of helps sort of bring things out a little bit more. Like they do mention the Jedi, they do mention a few other things that are going on around the galaxy around about this time, so you are aware that there is a bigger world out there and this is only just one tiny part of it. And the Star Wars galaxy is ripe for exploration because there's so many worlds and aliens and different cultures and all sorts that are part of this that honestly there's so many stories that you could tell as part of this universe. But for this movie there's only really 3 main places that the characters go throughout this film. We start off with Tatooine, which is just this desert planet which is probably inspired by Arrakis from the Dune series, which was out before this movie, so I definitely think there was a big influence on that. Dune is quite an influential movie, so I wouldn't imagine that it wouldn't have had any sort of impact on this one. Tatooine, it definitely looks unique with the way that they've got like all the sand huts and the way that they've got like the trenches with all the houses in, the markets and the cantina and things like that. And then we've got the Death Star, which is like this highly militarized battle station that's like this gigantic moon-shaped weapon basically. It's really sneaky actually designing a place like this because you can basically use the same little T-junction as many times as you want, and you can just turn the angle around and change the positions of where the actors are running and everything's going on, and it would look like it was just like this really huge maze. Because don't forget, there was no such thing as the volume back then, so this is all practical. So having now brought that up, actually reminds me the sets that they had for Tatooine, I believe they actually are still there on location. I'm not quite sure the exact location where they did film it, but where Luke's house is, apparently that is still there. But apparently they had a lot of issues while they were trying to film the stuff in the desert, and a lot of the props and everything kept falling over, and especially with Anthony Daniels going out into the sand dunes, and they basically just sort of left him out there. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And then the last location is a planet called Yavin 4, which is basically like this a little moon that's orbiting like this gigantic red planet. We don't really spend a lot of time on there. It does look nice, it does look quite interesting. I like the sort of ancient tombs that they've sort of got within like all this forest surroundings. We don't really get to spend too much time in there. We only really get to see like the interiors, so we get to see like the war room and where all the pilots are and all the ships, the X-Wings. If you do want to see more of that planet, I do recommend having a look at some of the video games like the Battlefront games and the Genndy Tartakovsky series of Clone Wars. But each world feels very unique and different from each other, and that's something that does continue on forwards throughout the franchise. And continuing on, and speaking of things that are quite unique, the costumes that they use throughout this movie, they are instantly iconic. You know these costumes anywhere. Like you see the Stormtrooper design, you know exactly what franchise it's from, you know what Darth Vader is from, even like down to like the Jedi robes. Even though this is a movie from the 70s and there definitely are elements that are 70s inspired in here, it does still have this timeless quality to it, and it does extend to a lot of the aliens that they have in this movie. Like obviously the cantina sequence is one of the most iconic alien reveal scenes ever, because there's so many different species and designs and costumes and puppets and all these different elements that just work together so well. It really holds up brilliantly, and the reason for that is that every species feels very different. If you get any like the books or behind the scenes things, they do go into detail about why they look the way they do. So I do like how that is incorporated, and I do like how that is something that they have kind of followed through on a lot of the different movies, so they are able to sort of adapt these characters into the environment that they're in. And that includes a lot of the droids that they have as well, because again, they are instantly iconic. You recognise 3PO and R2 a mile away. They all feel very unique, and they all feel like they are from wherever it was that they were constructed. And that also extends to the ships that they have as well. Like, all the rebels look very like scrapped together, like they've just got hold of everything that they could to try and make these ships. Whereas all the stuff with the Empire is very industrialised. The first shot of the movie instantly shows just how powerful the Empire is, just from the way that they have the ships. The rebels are just this little tiny freighter, and the next thing you know, above head just comes this gigantic Star Destroyer, and it immediately sets the stage for just how powerless the rebels actually are. The only ship that they have in the movie that doesn't fit into either the rebels or the Empire is the Millennium Falcon, and I've said it so many times now, this is such an iconic design. Everybody recognises that ship. It's a piece of junk, but everybody loves it. But then we also get into like the sound design as well, because each ship sounds very different from each other. Like, we've got normal sort of ship noises for like all the X-Wings and Y-Wings. The Falcon sounds a lot bigger and heavier, like it's just trying to keep itself together. And then you have like these horrible screechy sounds from the TIE fighters. They all sound great, and they all sound very unique and individual. And the same can be said for a lot of the weapons that they use in this movie. Like, all the blasters that they use, all the little guns, they are all personalised to whoever it is that carries them. Like, obviously Han, he's quite the cocky guy, so of course he's just got this one-handed blaster that he always just uses one hand for. And then you have the stormtroopers, again quite industrialised, got two hands, they never hit their mark. Chewie's bowcaster, and of course the lightsabers. Now, if you're pretty new to the franchise, one of the things that you might not be aware of is that when they were originally designing the lightsabers, they were originally going to be just like these gigantic like reflective rods that they shined lights onto to make them light up. So originally lightsabers were only meant to be like a white colour, and they were meant to be held by the stormtroopers. But I'm not quite sure when that changed, because eventually they became the more iconic red and blue, and it was only red and blue throughout this movie, and it was only intended to ever be blue for the good guys, the Jedi, and red for the Sith and the Empire. Lightsabers are basically just like these really high-tech swords, and it is easy to see where a lot of the inspiration that George Lucas had when he was creating this, because they are very reminiscent of like samurai movies. I mean, they're 10 times cooler than samurai swords. It is a big part of why this franchise really does stand out, because it is a mixture of all these different inspirations, that especially in things like Mandalorian, they've gone back to a lot of those influences to help sort of shape what that franchise is like, and that's why it feels more like what the original trilogy was. Because I said samurai films and Dune, but there was also a lot of other things as well, like there was like World War II movies, like those old black and white ones, especially like when it came to like the editing, which I'll get on into a minute. But then they also have like cliffhanger serials where you got like the trash compactor sequence, where that would be like tune in next week to find out what happens to them. That's definitely a big sort of influence in this, and that's actually a big thing that happens with Indiana Jones as well. Flash Gordon, which they have openly admitted was an influence on this, because I believe it was a comic book series around the time before the film. Again, that's another thing that's definitely added towards it. There's definitely visual influences from it. I would say that maybe things like John Carter might have had a bit of an inspiration here and there, but I don't know for sure, because don't forget, John Carter was written by the same guy who wrote Tarzan, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and it predates pretty much every single thing that I've mentioned so far. But there's also a heavy influence of magic and myths as well within this, because obviously we have the Force, which is kind of a version of both like religion and a form of magic as well. So even though when people are putting this movie into a specific genre, I'll never say that this is an outright sci-fi movie. I think this is more a fantasy than anything else. Things like the lightsabers, the Force, there's sound in space, and you can hear the ships flying around, which scientifically that shouldn't be possible. So there is definitely a huge fantasy element to be part of this. Now, I do have to bring up the editing for this movie. If you aren't aware, when this movie was being made, a lot of people, including the studio, didn't really have a lot of faith in it. That's kind of why they only really sort of did any sort of contracts for the first movie. So George Lucas was able to kind of make the second and third on his own. But when it came to the edit for this movie, even George Lucas himself said that this movie was going to flop. Like, nobody seemed to have any faith in it whatsoever. The thing that saved it was the edit. For all intents and purposes, the movie was a bit of a mess from the sound of it. Now, we don't know what the rough cut was like. You know, if you did see it, then maybe you'd be able to clarify this, but from everything that's been documented, that's been said, it does sound like it was just a mess when it was originally made. So when they started editing the movie together, all the people who worked in the editing department, all the assistants, all the colourists, they were all part of this, and they managed to help save this movie and make it what it was. And sort of bringing the inspiration into this a little bit more, the way that some of the action sequences are edited are quite similar to a lot of the World War II movies that were out around about the time, especially like the dog fights. The action is genuinely really good in this movie. It is really fast paced and it is edited really well. It's all shot in a way that you can see everything that's going on, you can see what all the actors are doing, you can see what all the ships are doing. The entire third act with the X-Wings against the Death Star, the trench run, it's really intense, and it is definitely heightened by the ticking clock that they have that's going throughout this sequence. It is a genuinely brilliant sequence. I will admit, purely because of how the future movies and TV shows have kind of handled it, looking back I do think that the lightsaber fight is a little underwhelming. Again, for the time I think that it genuinely was good, and it was great seeing the two actors who were actually in the costumes, and as well as Alec Guinness, that they did do a really good enough job. But having said that, and looking back on it now with the knowledge of everything that's happened in all of the future movies from this point on, I do think that the lightsaber fight could have been a little bit better. You know, it is great seeing the actors actually doing this, so you don't lose anything from the performances or anything like that, but I do think it could have been a little bit better. Actually, there is a really great edit that's been released on YouTube. I think it's called Scene 38, and honestly, if you haven't seen it, just watch it. It is fantastic how it's done. I'll put the link down in the description if you want to check it out. But overall, I do think that the action in this movie is genuinely handled really well. There's also some really fun comedy that's injected into this as well. It definitely helps sort of lighten things up a little bit. Like, it's not anywhere near as dark as like Empire or Return of the Jedi. This is definitely one of the lighter movies in the franchise, and the comedy is actually done pretty well. It is rare for every joke to really land, but I do think this one does work quite well because most of the jokes are very much in character. It never feels out of place or forced in or anything like that. It definitely does feel like it is genuinely coming out from the frustrations of these characters or them just being clever in the right moments. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The stormtrooper entering one of the rooms, he's just a little bit taller than some of the others, and he bangs his head on the door he's going through. I am slightly amazed that they did leave that scene in, but there are definitely a few little takes here and there that they have left mistakes in. Like, there's a scene where R2 and 3PO are getting sold off to Luke, and one of the I think is it R5 droid gets taken off with Luke and 3PO, and next thing you know, the shot next to it is R2, and right behind him you can see the exact same one that's just disappeared. There are definitely a few little continuity mistakes here and there, but it definitely does add to the charm of this movie, because again, this could have been a mess from everything that we've heard, so honestly, it doesn't bother me. The effects that they use in this movie were groundbreaking for the time, and honestly they still do hold up really well. A lot of the shots of like the ships flying through space or just like doing the dogfights and everything, they look great. I think the way that they overlay the stuff with the lightsabers and the lasers, it never looks out of place, and it does work really well. I'm going to say something that might be just a little bit controversial here, but I think that compared to a lot of the movies that were around at that time, there's one big movie that came out 1 year later that has a lot of similar effects to it that I don't think are as good as this, and that is Superman. That movie has a lot of green screen and blue screen effects that were really good for that movie, but I don't think they hold up anywhere near as well as the ones in Star Wars. Now you're probably asking about those CGI sequences and saying, well, they don't look really good, and I'll agree with you on that, because they were actually added in a lot later. I think it was like 2004, something like that. where George Lucas did a big re-release of the original trilogy with like all these really updated special effects. Some of them are okay. I like some of the things that he does add into it. They could have been a lot better. It could visually have been a lot better. I think when it comes to like the changes that they did make in the special editions, I do think that the ones for Empire and Return of the Jedi I think work a little better. I think the ones that they had in this one, not as good. I don't like that they've added Jabba in this because he wasn't supposed to be introduced just yet. I don't like that they've managed to sneak Boba Fett into this one because, again, he doesn't need to be introduced in this one. But the biggest gripe, and I think most Star Wars fans are going to agree with me on this, is did Han shoot first? Yes, he did, and they changed it. For some reason, his head now moves a fraction of a centimetre, and it just looks weird. It doesn't work, and I really don't like that they've added that in. But the stuff that I did like that they did add was a lot of the ships in space sequences, like all the X-Wings going past the red moon and a few of the shots of the Millennium Falcon. It does look quite nice, and I do think those are the effects that I think do look actually quite good. Well, I mentioned Superman, so that was a really good time to bring it up. The music for this movie, just like pretty much everything else in this, it is instantly iconic. It is so recognisable. It is one of the most recognisable movie themes of all time. Thank you, John Williams. It's such an amazing score, and again, every single character location, they all have a unique theme, and the score really does help emphasise that. I think compared to the future episodes, I don't necessarily think that the soundtrack for this one's as good as some of the other ones. That's just my personal opinion, but it is instantly iconic. It's so recognisable. It is so good. It fits this world so well. It's set basically the bar for pretty much every film soundtrack. I don't think John Williams has ever made a bad soundtrack in his life, and I think that this is definitely one of the best ones he's done. Overall, I think this is an absolutely fantastic movie, and rewatching it, it is genuinely still a genuinely brilliant movie. It's a good beginning for everything that follows, but it stands on its own 2 feet really well. The characters, the performances are great, the locations, the effects, the action, the comedy, everything about it works so well. It is genuinely a brilliant movie. It has this genuinely great feel-good quality to it as well. It's really quotable, and overall it is just an absolute classic and a must-see for everyone. And with all that being said, my rating for this movie, it's got to be a 10 out of 10. That's the first 10 out of 10 on this channel, and it definitely won't be the last. It's mad to think that so many people didn't have any sort of faith in this, considering how much of a juggernaut this franchise actually is at this point in time. It is a movie that completely changed cinema. It changed the way that franchises are made, the merchandise, everything about what we know from like the modern day cinema was kind of formed from this movie. Because I even said it a little bit earlier, like George Lucas himself didn't really have a lot of faith in this movie either. He didn't even attend the premiere for this film. He went on holiday to Hawaii with Steven Spielberg, where they came up with the idea for Indiana Jones. Well, there's a little bit of trivia for you. But honestly, this is a genuinely incredible movie. It's not my favourite of the franchise. I think you can probably guess which one it is. Honestly, that's all I've really got to say for today. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of the movie down below if you've seen it. If you haven't, why not? Give it a go. Let me know which movie is your favourite out of the franchise, which trilogy is your favourite, which TV series do you like, what's your favourite lightsaber colour. Feel free to comment away. If you have any suggestions for any other rewinds you want me to do in the future, again, let me know down in the comments and I'll try and get around to them as soon as I can. But honestly, thank you so much. Please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on this channel. And honestly, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. May the Force be with you.